Hello and welcome to American Friction. I'm Chris Jones. America has long had a problem with neo-Nazis and white supremacists, and in recent years, we've seen time and time again the sort of violence they're willing to commit in pursuit of their racist causes. Trump has often pandered to these groups, speaking of good people on both sides after the Charlottesville race riots, for example. And given his hardline stance on immigration, you'd imagine the neo-Nazis would be fairly happy with his leadership, and largely they are. But there is a whole load of tension there between the two. And the question that we're going to be answering today is, why is that? Well, to discuss all of that and the state of the neo-Nazi movement in the US, I'm joined by freelance national security journalist Ben Makuch. Ben, thanks for coming back on American Friction.
Thanks for having me.
Lots to get into here, but let's open with a huge question. A massive one, so apologies for that. But what is the scale of the neo-Nazi movement in the US right now?
Okay, so I think that there's a few things to distinguish on that as well. So the neo-Nazi, I would say, like the skinhead, the whole factions. We're looking at, skinheads guys who are in groups like the Aryan Brotherhood. Plus, we're looking at the ones who kind of flirt with it on the far right or the alt-right. Plus groups like we're going to talk about, like the Base, or formerly known as Adam Waffen Division, or another group called that. I would put it, at least that it's probably in the hundreds of thousands of people. At least, I think, if you factor in the entire number of it. But when you start narrowing down to some of the groups that are really active, I think it gets less and less. But the thing is, these groups have an outsized amount of influence on politics. And I think if you also then broaden it out to the extreme right, or like the hard, far, far right, that number is, unfortunately, I'm ballparking here, but I'm sure it would crack in the millions.
Yeah.
Which is a scary thing to say now in 2025. But I think when you're looking at some of the politics that have kind of unraveled in the US, that's likely true.
It's incredible, isn't it? Because from the outside, I guess, from the UK looking into America, a lot of the time people get tricked into thinking that America's past this. It's past the influence of the Ku Klux Klan, for example, and all of this incredibly dangerous race rhetoric. But that's really not the case, is it? And also, I mentioned in the intro that I said the word movement. But is it fair to actually say movement when there are so many factions that are pulling in so many different directions?
I think it's fair to say movement, because I think at this point, what you're tapping into is that the mainstreaming of what I think would cohere, and I think a lot of historians are now kind of jumping on this bandwagon of saying this is true, would cohere to the rise of the Nationalist Socialist Party in Germany, which became the Third Reich in the 20s and 30s. I think if you look at sort of the politics that have become mainstream in the United States and some of the sort of very grassroots support that you're seeing, I would say this is a movement. Especially, I know we're going to talk about it, but you look at something like what Trump did recently by taking, a stake in U.S. companies and saying we should do it with defense companies, which is obviously a clear jolt towards what the Nazis actually did, which was nationalize military companies and defense companies. So I think you take it all in, it's become a movement. It's without a doubt. I think people who've covered sort of these more paramilitary organizations that have sort of festered over the past, since I'd say 2014 onwards, or even you could probably go even a little bit further back to the election of Barack Obama. Those groups, I never would have thought just how mainstream and accepted they become, and how some of them, let's say like the Proud Boys, which became increasingly militant over the course of its history, how not only have they become popular, but they also gained the trust and respect of a sitting U.S. president. So I think, long story short, a movement is right. A movement is true.
And you mentioned it a minute ago. You mentioned the Proud Boys. I think we all know about the Proud Boys. They're such a big movement with the founded by McInnes, for example. But then you have these other groups like the Base that you mentioned before, and also Blood Tribe. But let's go to the Base. Could you describe to me exactly, what this group is and what they stand for in America today?
So the Base was founded sometime in 2017, 2018 by a man named Ronaldo Nazaro, who's from New Jersey. He was kind of a wealthy kid who ended up, in one way or another, working for the Department of Homeland Security as an analyst during, the fallout from September 11th. So this is just post 9/11. Then ended up, in that boom of contracting and Pentagon contracting specifically, ended up working for the Pentagon. And I was one of the journalists who found out that he'd actually worked for the Special Forces as a contractor, as a unmanned aerial vehicle, so drone strike targeteer or targeter. So it's helping put together lists of, at that time would have been terror suspects or kill lists, which became pretty famous during that period. It was just essentially guys in ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Taliban, different groups like that and organizations that the CIA was knocking off, and he was a part of that. And he became, along the way, dismayed with GWAT, started to fall further and further into the far right, that rabbit hole, and race politics, and then got to the point where he became a neo-Nazi and what's called an American Balkanist. So the idea that you should be able to chop off pieces of the United States to create sort of a white homeland.
Right.
Something that's been very popular among groups that were linked to the Oklahoma City bombing and other organizations that were deeply, deeply neo-Nazis. And he subscribed to it and founded the base, which many people will say it's the name for Al-Qaeda in Arabic. From all I know, that's not why he named it. But also, part of me thinks he did name it that way because it would be kind of this incessant troll that, I have to deal with all the time because I've been reporting on the group for a very long time.
Yeah.
But in 2018, he went about recruiting men into it, and they got about 50 or 60 deep. But he was specifically going after veterans, people, or active duty combat soldiers to get skills. And what they are accelerationist neo-Nazis, which, to say the least, is a neo-Nazi organization that believes in terrorist acts to bring down the US government and world governments in order to then replace it with a racist kind of Third Reich-y organization in its wake. Now, this group exploded, became an FBI nationwide investigation target, multiple arrests, but it went international. And now it's prescribed in the UK, for example. A kid got arrested, I think, sometime in the winter and spring. And now it's all over Europe, and they're even in Ukraine. So it's been quite the journey for that group, but now it's this it's based in the US, but it's now everywhere.
How typical, though, is that origin story, I guess, when it comes to, an ex-military person, vet, leaves the military, and then falls into this, as you described, rabbit hole of the far right? Because I mentioned it before, Blood Tribe, Christopher Polhouse, who founded Blood Tribe, is also a vet.
A Marine vet.
Yeah, exactly. And someone who wanted to create a white haven. I think he bought some land somewhere close to New York. I can't remember exactly where it was.
Maine.
Was it? Yeah, in Maine. But he was forced to sell it off because he just couldn't get the support that he wanted. So is this origin story, I guess, quite typical when it comes to the creation of these neo-Nazi groups?
It's about as American as apple pie, I think is the way to put it, because if you look at the history, and not even just including something like neo-Nazis, so before the neo-Nazis ever existed, there was the Ku Klux Klan, and the Old South, which Hitler mentions in Mein Kampf, really admiring the racial politics that created that state, or the Confederacy. But so in every single major war that the US has ever fought since the Civil War, there has been a massive uptick in extremist organizations, paramilitary organizations. If we just look at the formation of the Ku Klux Klan, for example, you look at Civil War, right after, it was founded by mostly Confederate soldiers. Some of the most elite soldiers became the leaders of it, like Nathan Bedford Forrest, who was the first Grand Wizard.
Yeah.
The reason it's called a Grand Wizard to be in the Ku Klux Klan and be its leader is because Nathan Bedford Forrest was nicknamed in papers as the Wizard of the Saddle during the Civil War. That's purely why it has that name. Then we look at, the Spanish-American War. There's another uptick in Ku Klux Klan. World War I, massive uptick. Then it became a huge, huge problem in the 20s and 30s. Died down by the 30s. World War II happens. Guess what happens again? Ku Klux Klan spikes. Now, when we get to the Vietnam War, that era of the Vietnam War is a very modern war. So you had, guerrillas, and they were fighting the Viet Cong, for example. So you're in the jungles wearing, actual camouflage. You are engaging in what we think war looks like now, although it's changing right now with the Ukraine war. But it's not so silly as to put on a hood and to burn crosses. You need to be a paramilitary organization. Now, out of that came a lot of these organizations like the Base and like others that wanted to not only be neo-Nazis, but they wanted to be insurgencies against the US government. And they look at and thought of themselves as militaries or paramilitaries, as cadres, as the Viet Cong for white people in America. And since then, this has been this sort of thing that people have grasped onto, and it's getting worse and worse. And with Trump, I think we can talk about it, but the FBI is extremely uninterested now in policing the far right. So that's where we're at today.
So let's talk about that. Let's get onto the FBI afterwards. But first, let's start with Trump and the relationship that exists here. Weird to say that the president has any kind of relationship with these dangerous racists right across the country, and there's so many of them. What is that relationship like? I know he's spoken about the Proud Boys in contradictory ways before. He's condemned them, but then also almost appeared to talk as if he works alongside them. I think he told them to stand aside at one point in a
stand
speech.
up and stand down or something like that. Yeah.
That came across to me as there's a relationship there. Now that's speculative, but. I mean, we can probably guess from what's happened since then how he feels about a lot of these people. And we mentioned it in the intro as well about the Charlottesville riots. He said good people on both sides. So has this second coming of Trump, has it emboldened these types of groups to fight for their cause even more than perhaps they were when Biden was in charge?
Oh, absolutely. I think with Biden, the one thing, and also to be fair, I think under Trump 1, there was crackdowns on some of these groups. It was one of the things the FBI was doing. It was still independent. It was still, saying that it was going to go after the far right. And it did in many cases. This time round, it's the opposite. I'll holster the FBI conversation, but with Trump, the way it looks now is his relationship with a group like the Proud Boys, which at the time of January 6th kind of looked very much like the relationship that, and I'm not being hyperbolic, the relationship that Hitler had with the Brown Shirts, which was this unofficial kind of stormtrooper brigade that he used for the streets. And honestly, the Proud Boys kind of had a similar action. Of course, there's also along with groups like the Three Percenters that are militia. Now, when they all went to jail and he came back, he obviously wrote 1,500 pardons, complete pardons, like unconditional pardons, which is very, it's pretty unprecedented. So at that point, it was pretty clear that if you're on the far right, Trump's FBI is not going to care much about you. Now, I think when you look at those sort of more nationalist groups, American nationalists, like the Proud Boys or the Three Percenters, which definitely flirt and play with proto-fascism and neo-Nazism, they will claim that they have people of color in their ranks. There's no way they can be racist. It's not true. What they do is racist. It's very clear.
Yeah.
Those groups really knew that they were it was going to be a free show for them for the next 4 years. There are allegations and rumors that some of them started to join law enforcement, to become sort of these figures for the Trump administration. Some of them have actually become figures on the GOP trail. So like Enrique Tarrio talks who's the former, one of the Proud Boy leaders. He talks on, all these GOP gatherings and speeches, and people are really kind of heroizing him. And then you look at the neo-Nazis, and the one thing that they loved about Trump this time round is that he's been doing these ICE raids. And he's been doing this sort of cemented policy to get rid of quote unquote illegals. And let me tell you, I lived in Brooklyn and there were ICE raids on my street 2 days after the inauguration. They didn't stop by the time I left in the midsummer. It was that bad. And I want international people to know this. Like, it's truly masked, unmarked police cars grabbing people off the street. It's crazy. The neo-Nazis love it. They love it, but they started to lose Trump on Israel, for one. I mean, obviously, these people are very anti-Semitic. They're against the war in Gaza, but more importantly, they really are just anti-Semitic. So literally anything, the state of Israel could do anything, and they would hate them and hate Trump's association with it. So that became one part of it. But truly, those types of groups never really saw Trump as one of their own, but they saw him as a means to an end. And now, with this sort of fascistic military in the streets, they don't like that either. They are really against that, because to them, this is, an overreach. But also, they now see this as an opportunity. They see, look what we've been saying is going to happen. There's going to be a balkanization and destruction of the U.S. government. We have to be ready for when it happens. We have to be training. We have to be militant. And from all my reporting and everything I know, that's what they're doing. And to be honest with you, the trajectory of the United States government, I suspect that there could be some problems coming in the future with these types of groups.
So let's get to the FBI then. And Kash Patel has been put in charge. It's a pretty interesting case because he's someone who has faced, a whole lot of racism from these types of groups. But when you look at what the FBI is now doing under his leadership, it appears to be investigating these kinds of groups, such as the Bay, such as Blood Tribe, such as Proud Boys, less than before Trump came in. Is that right? And if that is right, what is going on? Why is it happening?
It's absolutely right. I've had multiple sources tell me that with knowledge of FBI goings on, that there's a complete shift. They've taken agents off of cases. They've slashed entire teams. He did a huge number on the Hoover building and the National Security Division. So the Hoover building is like essentially what was, or kind of still is, I think, the center of the FBI. It's in Washington, D.C. It's a giant building. It goes deep underground. I've been inside of it. It's a fortress. But it was mostly the National Security Division that was there. Not most, but a lot of it was there. So people that went after Al-Qaeda, went after terrorist organizations, and he slashed them all. Like, he really cut it down. He's slashed complete affiliations with academic institutions doing research into extremism and radicalization. Yeah, it's been a wholesale pivot away from it. And experts have said that it's hurting far-right investigations and domestic terrorism. It's also hurting investigations of groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. So on the one hand, you hear Trump saying we're going to go after the terrorists and, the dangerous Islamists, but he's done everything to kind of undermine that with some of the investigative tools that he has. And now we're seeing it just being completely decimated. So what's very interesting, and this happened right away, this was overnight. Now everybody on the far right, including groups like The Base and the now defunct Adam Waffen Division and the other accelerationist neo-Nazis, have openly said, I've obtained things that they've written online that have said, we are now in a position where we don't think they're coming after us. This is the time we have to start organizing, arming up, recruiting, and start looking at our goals in the future. So it's pretty frightening.
And what are those goals of the future that you talk about there? What exactly is it that they think they're training for?
So there's a book called The Turner Diaries, which is a really poorly, dare I say it, and pardon my French, shitty novel written by a scientist.
Right.
Now, scientists don't typically make great prose, and it wasn't. It was this shitty book about this guy named Earl Turner who ends up becoming this sort of terrorist Rambo who joins a group called the Order, who's a neo-Nazi and hates all Jewish people and black people especially. They rob banks, they finance their movement, they end up firing nukes at, I think, the rest of the world to create this white ethno-state. But they got this one thing called the Day of the Rope during the Second Civil War, where they hang race traitors, like journalists like myself, Jewish people, anybody who's had, and this all goes down on Capitol Hill. And basically they're fighting for that. They want to see the end of the US government. They want to exact their revenge on everybody who's ever corrupted the United States of America and its white past. And that's what they're fighting for. That's what they're hoping for in the future. And more of their online conversations basically are saying it's close. It's going to happen. Get ready. So they're arming up. I'm doing a story for The Guardian that should be out by the time this is out about how they look at FPV drones and kamikaze drones and kill drones and how they see them as a future force multiplier against the U.S. government. And that, there's a former Marine that is advising people covertly to get them. So who also happens to be part of that accelerationist neo-Nazi underground. So yeah, it's a real thing. That's what they're going for.
Fucking hell, that is terrifying.
Yeah.
You also mentioned recruitment a second ago, and I want to get onto something that I think another thing that you wrote in the Guardian. You wrote about these active clubs that seem to be, well, you tell me, they seem to be spreading or gaining more traction. First of all, what are these active clubs, and are these a key way that these types of groups in the Trump era are trying to recruit new people to their goals, to this regime that they have?
Yes. So active clubs are, long story short, proto-fascist fight clubs. It's what's actually creating the actual brown shirts, I would say, of the future. It's probably the most similar to these sort of street fighting neo-Nazis that believe in sort of the rise of the Fourth Reich or whatever you want to call it. But they're modeled slightly on European soccer hooligans. It was founded by this guy named Rob Rundo, who's got a colorful past and founding other FBI investigated neo-Nazi fight clubs. They're really into ultimate fighting. They're really into mixed martial arts.
Yeah.
They've been doing tournaments. They've been kind of sponsoring fighters. They either appear at like gyms in your city or parks training. And like, to be honest with you, some of these guys are like legitimately fighters. You can see them, they're tough, they're jacked.
Christopher Pohlhaus, as we mentioned, former Marine.
Former Marine, exactly. I mean, there's a lot of Marines that have kind of... The Marines are both one of the most diverse parts of the military and one of the most... has a history of having the most white supremacists.
Yeah.
It's kind of an interesting dichotomy. But yeah, former Marine as well. And I think Pohlhaus has kind of flirted with active clubs. Now, these things are really catching on. Like they're spreading all over the country. I've never seen more of a boom of a neo-fascist organization than this. I think part of it is that it sort of shows itself as this clean-cut version of it. It's kind of like the fascist next door, rather than it being like the scary ghoul wearing the like camouflage, holding like the AR-15, talking about hanging people. This one's like, hey, young men out there, because there's a crisis about machismo these days and masculinity, so to speak, apparently. Come join this group. You're going to get jacked. You're going to be like part of a team. You're going to like, you're going to fight for yourself. You're going to belong. And it's working. They've got these youth groups as well, these youth chapters that have spawned across the US. And now it's spreading into Europe. It's become a European thing. Yeah, it's another case of an American-born far-right organization that's traveling around the world.
And do you think that this kind of outfit, that the rapid state that they seem to be spreading in, as you've mentioned, and the types of people that control these groups, do you think that's one of the big reasons that we've seen Trump try to cozy himself up to these types of groups? Because, for all intents and purposes, they're pretty strong and they can be a good ally for him to, clean up the streets, which is a terrible analogy and also not true because that's not what their goal is. But he sees an ally in them and he sees a strong ally in them.
Yeah.
And perhaps that's why this tension that exists between them is perhaps so troubling for the administration, and why it's cooled down any FBI investigation into them.
Yes, it's extremely troubling. How do I put it? I mean, it's kind of the chicken before the egg conversation, because I think the Democrats would love to have this main line to the UFC. So I don't think it's just a Trump thing. I think Trump sees the incredible political capital that's there.
Yeah.
It's the most, across every ethnic, religious line of the American male, it is the most popular thing in the entire country. So I think that's obviously a massive tool. Now, I also think it's sort of had this predilections of being a little bit far right or a little bit right wing. So kind of maybe more naturally fits itself into the Republican viewpoint. But I also think that basically its popularity showed the far right that it was interested in it. And then I think what you'll have is these kind of middle of the road guys who love Trump and love the UFC and might have a couple, xenophobic opinions and might see these active clubs and see it as, oh, maybe that's something I want to get involved in. Maybe that's something I want to do. And there are, I'm always reminded of the guy's name and I always forget because I, to be honest with you, I don't really give a shit about UFC personally. I know I have like one of my best friends is a massive UFC guy and he was like a wrestler and I just can't get into it. To me, it's just a bunch of dudes wrestling slowly and I'm kind of like, okay, all right. Well, is it going to be over yet? Yeah. But yeah, I think it's something that's very popular and I think people get seduced by it. And I think when you have the opportunity to be involved in it and you might see a UFC fighter like the one I'm forgetting, who is a far right guy involved, I think it becomes kind of this more mainstream thing. And you're not going to see someone like that being banned in the age of Trump, right? Like he will not be banned. So I don't know if Trump certainly didn't get involved with the UFC because he thought he could create fascist fight clubs out of them, but I'm positive that he probably understands, that his people understand the power of creating clubs and people who are more and more white nationalists who are behind him. And I think he sees the UFC as a way of corralling that support. And I think he's always known that extremist side of nationalism and how he needs them. It's been a hallmark of the beginning of his run in 2015 to his now second presidency in 2025. So yeah, it really is this sort of snake eating its tail kind of situation.
But also on the contrary, we talk about how these groups could prove to be a key ally for Trump and give him strength almost, as it were. But also, could they prove to be quite a fatal enemy in the same respect as well, especially when, as you mentioned previously, Trump's relationship with Benjamin Netanyahu, people that, these groups think the Jewish state is abhorrent and shouldn't exist. And they see Trump's relationship with Netanyahu and they hate it. If Trump pushes that too far, that could ruin every relationship that he has with these groups, right?
It could, but unfortunately, I think that Trump's done enough baiting and switching on the topic of Gaza, where he's sort of made it seem like he is upset with it, but then doesn't do anything about it, much like how Biden did things. I think things have obviously really ramped up under Trump. I don't think that's an inaccurate thing to say, that the war's gotten, if it was possible, it has always been horrific, but it's gotten more and more horrific as time has gone on.
Sure.
And I think that there had been sections of the UFC crowd and the far right and the right wing who saw it as sort of this demonic Israeli state doing these things. But I think now, if I'm honest, I think that they see it as two groups of people they don't like, and it's kind of to them, it's fading away. And they care about the US, they don't care about the rest. I think to them, they see it as an example of Trump will always be and I think they always have pointed this out, that he's got a daughter who's married to a Jewish man and that he's kind of an undercover, controlled by Zionists. I think they just see it as more evidence of that. And now they keep looking at it as, well, how can we use him? And will he come after us at some point? And I think that's sort of where the state of it is.
Just finally, I guess to wrap everything together here, how big is this threat to American democracy? I guess to global democracy as well. Global relationships between America and its Western allies, because you've explained that these groups of they're not just contained to America anymore. They've spread right across the world. So how dangerous right now do you see these groups to American democracy?
I think it is so insanely. I think it was a massive threat in 2016. I think it was just this underbelly of it that was just sparking and getting worse and worse. And I think it's really insane to me, some of the politics that are now allowed out in the open. And I think, quite honestly, these groups, especially the really hard right ones, have sort of, they've kind of seeded the ground for it. They spread a lot of ideas that then spread slowly from the underbelly upwards into like the mainstream. I think they're very happy about it. But just the fact that you have Congress people openly saying racist things about how, someone can barely be a citizen if they're Muslim, for example, is a level of racism I just didn't think would be, especially after the Iraq War, something I'd see. And I think, I had a couple kind of indicators of things that I thought were scary about the U.S. Would they go after judges? They did it. They arrested one. Would he deploy the troops domestically? He's done it. He's now looking to nationalize defense companies. I mean, these are all like just earmarked stuff. I mean, the secret police, if you look at it, like ICE really has become a form of secret police, of Gestapo. Yeah. I don't think that's hyperbolic to say, especially they're abducting people without trial, they refuse to give badge numbers. I mean, this is really insane stuff. This is truly, I think in the first Trump administration, calling it fascist state, it was like, yeah, it's getting there for sure. And maybe we're just splitting hairs. But now, I mean, I don't know how you could say it's not. I think it's very clearly there. So I think these groups are a bellwether, and I think that they're incredibly dangerous and scary, and they're going unchecked. And I think that they're also they're a snapshot of what America is becoming. And I think if I were American, I'd be very upset about this, and I'd hope that my country would change.
And I guess also the major issue is, even if there is regime change, even if the Democrats win the next election, this is going to take a whole lot of time, a whole lot of work to undo all the damage that's been done and to de-recruit, I guess, these far-right neo-Nazi groups that you've described. It's going to take a whole lot of time and a whole lot of effort.
So much so, and especially when you get these guys go unchecked, then they can perfect their operational security, that they can't be detected. They don't need to be online anymore. Maybe they're able to do this completely offline. You don't know their numbers, you don't know their weapons caches, you don't know what they've been planning. And I think like also the advent of technology that's come in the last couple of years, I'd say so kind of specifically like the rise of the FPV, AI. Now that AI is this thing that it's just created more and more powers to these groups. Like it's made, for example, their propaganda to multiply it. It's just overnight they were able to do it.
Yeah.
And also create like battle plans for them, create terrorist attack plans for them. All that plus not being policed like they were before is a pretty scary cocktail. And I think that you match that with a government that is largely uncaring of the far right and sees it as a pseudo ally, if not an all-out ally, then you have yourself quite the problem. And I think if, as a national security reporter for years, having covered, everything from the ground movement of ISIS to now and groups like the base, I mean, I think this is all spells major trouble.
Well, Ben, you've successfully horrified me, but I'm glad of your time. Thanks for joining me on American Friction.
Thank you.
And thanks to you, listeners. We know some of these episodes can be pretty heavy, like the one you've just heard, but we think it's important to keep talking about some of the deepest problems that America has right now. And if you like what we do and how we're doing it, a huge thanks for the support you've already given us. And if you'd like to help keep us going, you can do that by backing us on Patreon. It's as little as £3 a month, and you can sign up by searching patreon.com/American Friction. There's a link down in the show notes of this episode. If you can't afford that, or just simply don't want to, fair enough. But please go and rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Chris Jones, and this is American Friction.